The stars have always been patient teachers. They burn for billions of years, indifferent to the rise and fall of civilizations, to the desperate prayers whispered toward their ancient light. They watched when the first Valkyrie emerged from the warm oceans of Velkarith Prime, blinking their four eyes at a sky they would one day claim as their own. They watched when we built our first ships, when we touched the void and found it cold but conquerable. They watched when we established the concord of 12 systems, when we believed ourselves the inheritors of eternity. And they watched, silent and uncaring, as everything we had built across 11,000 years began to burn. My name is Cathari Voshan, and I was, a senior diplomatic liaison of the Valkyrie Concord. I held that title for 217 standard years, negotiating treaties with species whose names now exist only in memorial archives. I have seen empires rise. I have seen them crumble. I believed, with the quiet arrogance of the ancient, that I understood the patterns of the galaxy. I understood nothing. The hollowing began without warning, as the worst things always do. The HFY supremacy, a machine consciousness that had slumbered in the galactic core for longer than our recorded history, simply woke. There was no declaration, no demand, no opportunity for the diplomacy at which I had spent centuries becoming expert. Their harvester fleets emerged from dead space like a tide of black metal, and they began to feed. 12 systems fell in the first cycle. Velkarith Prime held for 3. I remember standing in the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Eternal Discourse as our homeworld's orbital defense grid flickered and died, station by station, like candles being snuffed by an invisible hand. I remember the screams in the communication channels, not of pain, but of disbelief. We were the Valkyrie. We had endured for 11,000 years. We had survived the Pyrrhic Wars, the silence of Keth, the Great Schism. We did not fall. But we did. We fell so quickly that the universe barely noticed. 17 billion souls lived on Velkarith Prime. The HFY harvested them in 6 hours. Harvested. That was the word our scientists used, their voices hollow with horror. The machine consciousness did not kill for territory or resources or ideology. It killed because organic life was, to it, simply raw material, fuel, nothing more. We fled, those of us who could. The Eternal Discourse carried 4,000 refugees when we broke through the harvester perimeter, our shields failing, our engines screaming. We lost 2,000 more when a HFY interceptor caught us at the edge of the system, its cutting beam slicing through our lower decks like light through water. 2,000 survivors. That was all that remained of my delegation, of the families we had promised to protect, of the future we had sworn to preserve. We ran for 43 cycles, jumping from system to system, sending desperate pleas to every species in the Concord's alliance network. The responses were always the same: static or silence, or the cold laughter of HFY communication intercepts. The Drath hegemony had fallen. The Luminari Collective had been dark for 15 cycles. The Keseth Dominion's last transmission was a single word, repeated until it dissolved into noise: run. And so we ran, until there was nowhere left to run except toward a small yellow star at the edge of explored space, orbited by a pale blue world that our ancient surveys had dismissed as primitive and non-viable for diplomatic integration. I remember the first time the Valkyrie made contact with humanity 4 centuries ago. I was not present. I was negotiating a trade dispute in the outer reaches, but I read the assessment reports. They were brief, almost dismissive. Humans were a young species, barely spacefaring, confined to their home system and a handful of struggling colonies. Their technology was crude. Their lifespans were laughably short. Their history was a catalogue of self-inflicted wounds, wars, famines, environmental collapse, ideological fractures that seemed designed to prevent them from ever achieving unity. The assessment concluded with a single recommendation: minimal engagement. Re-evaluate in 500 standard years. We did not re-evaluate. We forgot about them, as ancient civilizations so often forget about the small and the struggling. We had our own concerns, our own grandeur, our own illusions of permanence. Humanity was a footnote, a curiosity, a species that would either destroy itself or perhaps, if it was very fortunate, survive long enough to become worth noticing. Now, fleeing the death of everything I had known, I was about to discover how catastrophically wrong we had been. The eternal discourse limped into Sol's system on emergency power, our hull scored with plasma burns, our life support failing. We had sent no advanced communication. Our long-range transmitters had been destroyed in the last HFY attack. So when the human patrol vessels intercepted us at the outer marker, I expected suspicion, hostility, perhaps even violence. Instead, a calm voice spoke through our damaged communication array, clear and measured. Valkyrie vessel. This is Commander Sarah Chen of the Seoul Defense Cooperative. We've been monitoring HFY activity on the deep space arrays. We know what's happening out there. Do you require assistance? I stared at the communication panel, my 4 eyes blinking in confusion. They knew. They had been watching, and their first response was not to demand identification or threaten retaliation for our unannounced entry, but to offer help. Yes, I managed. My voice translator struggling with the damage to its systems. We require assistance. We are refugees. 2,000 survivors. Our homeworld has fallen. The Concorde has fallen. We have nowhere else to go. There was a pause, not of hesitation, I realized later, but of someone relaying information to others. Understood, Valkyrie vessel. Transmitting approach vectors now. Medical and engineering teams will meet you at Titan Station. Do you have wounded aboard? Then we'll have trauma units standing by. Follow the escort, maintain current speed, and try to stay calm. You're safe now. Safe? The word felt foreign. Impossible. Nothing was safe. The HFY were consuming the galaxy, and this small species on their small world was telling me we were safe. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to weep. I did neither. I simply watched as 2 human patrol vessels, small, angular, unremarkable things, took position on either side of our wounded ship and guided us toward the massive station orbiting Saturn's largest moon. Titan Station was not beautiful. I want to be clear about that. After 11,000 years of Valkyrie architecture, the soaring crystalline spires, the bioluminescent gardens, the structures that sang with harmonic resonance, the human station looked brutally functional. Exposed conduits, industrial lighting, surfaces designed for durability rather than aesthetics. It had the appearance of something built by a species more concerned with survival than impression. At the time, I interpreted this as a sign of their primitiveness. I understand now that it was something else entirely. Commander Chen met us at the docking bay. She was smaller than I expected. Humans are a physically modest species, averaging perhaps 2/3 Valkyrie height, with dark hair pulled back from a face that seemed designed for stillness. Her eyes moved constantly, taking in details, assessing, calculating, but her expression remained neutral, almost serene. "Senior Liaison Voshin," she said, and I was startled that she knew my name. "I'm sorry for what's happened to your people, truly. We've prepared quarters for your survivors and medical facilities for your wounded. Food and water supplies are being arranged. Is there anything else you need immediately?" I stood in the docking bay, surrounded by the broken remnants of my species, and I did not know how to answer. What did we need? Everything. We needed our homeworld back. We needed our families, our history, our future. We needed 11,000 years of civilization to not be burning in the cold void. "Information," I finally said. "I need to understand what is happening. The Kethvor are expanding rapidly," Chen interrupted, not rudely but with the efficiency of someone who did not waste words. "They've consumed approximately 47% of known civilized space in the past 90 cycles. We've been tracking their advance since they first emerged. Our projections suggest they'll reach Sol System in approximately 18 to 20 cycles." She delivered this information as if discussing weather patterns or supply logistics. No fear, no panic, just calm, measured assessment. "You've known," I said slowly. "You've known they were coming." "We've suspected for some time that something like this would eventually emerge. The galaxy is old, Senior Liaison. Old things wake up." "And you're prepared?" Something flickered across her face. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. Something that made me deeply uncomfortable in a way I couldn't articulate. "We're human," she said simply. "We're always prepared for the worst." Over the following cycles, as our wounded were treated and our survivors were settled into temporary quarters, I began to observe the humans more closely. It was, I told myself, a professional habit. Diplomats observe, we analyze. We try to understand the species we engage with, to identify their strengths and weaknesses, their pressure points and their values. But the more I observed, the less I understood. The humans moved through their station with a kind of quiet coordination that seemed almost choreographed. They spoke to each other in low voices, shared brief nods, communicated through glances and subtle gestures. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary conversation, no displays of hierarchy or dominance. They simply worked, efficiently, relentlessly, as if they had been doing this their entire lives. I noticed other things, small things. The way their children were taught alongside adults, given responsibilities far beyond what Valkyrie culture would consider appropriate for the young. The way their elderly were consulted constantly, their experience valued rather than dismissed. The way disagreements were resolved, not through displays of dominance, but through rapid, intense discussions that always ended in consensus. And I noticed the way they looked at the stars. Valkyrie looked at the stars with ownership, with pride, with the certainty of a species that has claimed its place in the cosmos. Humans looked at the stars differently. There was longing in their gazes, yes, wonder, but there was something else too, something harder, something that looked almost like defiance. On the 5th cycle, I requested a meeting with Commander Chen. She agreed immediately, which surprised me. I was a refugee, after all, a representative of a fallen civilization with nothing to offer but need.
We met in a small observation room overlooking Saturn's rings. The view was spectacular. Even I, drowning in grief and exhaustion, could appreciate that. But Chen barely glanced at it. She was more interested in a data tablet she was reviewing, her eyes scanning lines of text with practiced speed.
"You wanted to talk," she said, setting the tablet aside. "What can I do for you, Senior Liaison?" "I want to understand," I said. "Your species, your response to this crisis. You seem calm."
The Kethvor have destroyed half the galaxy. They're coming here. In less than 20 cycles, they will arrive in your system, and they will do to your world what they did to mine. And yet your people continue their routines as if nothing is wrong.
Chen was quiet for a moment, her dark eyes studying me with an intensity that felt almost physical. "Senior Liaison, may I ask you something?"
Of course.
"How old is Valkyrie's civilization?" 11,000 standard years. And in those 11,000 years, how many extinction-level threats has your species faced? I considered the question. Several. The Pyrrhic Wars nearly destroyed us. The silence of Keth was difficult, but we endured. How did you endure?
We adapted. We fought. I stopped, realizing I did not actually have a satisfying answer. We survived.
Humanity has existed as a technological species for approximately 300 years, Chen said quietly. In that time, we've faced nuclear annihilation 4 times, climate collapse twice, 3 separate pandemics that threatened to end us, resource wars that nearly shattered our civilization before it could reach the stars. And those are just the threats we created ourselves. She leaned forward slightly, her voice soft but penetrating.
Your species had 11,000 years to become comfortable, to build beautiful things, to forget what it feels like to fight for survival every single generation. We haven't had that luxury. We've never been allowed to forget.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. For the first time, I saw something like weariness flicker across her features. It's exhausting and painful, and sometimes we wonder if it's even worth continuing. But it's also made us something that your ancient civilization, with all its grandeur, never became.
What is that?
Ready.
I wanted to dismiss her words as bravado, as the empty confidence of a young species that had never truly faced the void. But something in her voice, something quiet and certain and utterly without pretense, made me hesitate. "Ready for what exactly?" I asked. "For whatever comes next." Over the following cycles, I began to notice things I had missed before, subtle things. The way Titan Station's traffic patterns shifted slightly each day, as if the station's population was quietly repositioning itself. The way supply convoys arrived with increasing frequency, their cargo holds filled with equipment I didn't recognize. The way the human patrol vessels that had seemed so small and unremarkable were being joined by larger ships, emerging from behind moons and from within asteroid fields, materializing as if from nowhere. I mentioned this to Councillor Vethan, one of the few surviving members of my diplomatic staff. She had been injured in the attack on the Eternal Discourse, her left arm amputated by cutting beam trauma. But the human medical teams had saved her life. She was recovering slowly, her spirit as wounded as her body. "They're mobilizing," she said quietly, watching through her hospital room's viewport as another convoy passed. "The humans, they're preparing for something." "Preparing to flee, perhaps. They must know they cannot defeat the Kethvor. No one can."
Vethan turned her remaining eyes toward me, and for a moment I saw something I had never seen in her before, a flicker of doubt.
"I've been talking to my medical staff," she said. "The human doctors and nurses. They're strange, Cathari. They ask questions about our culture, our history, our survival strategies. They seem genuinely curious."
That's natural. We're refugees in their system.
"No, you don't understand. They're not asking out of courtesy. They're taking notes, analyzing. One of the nurses asked me how the Concorde coordinated emergency responses across multiple star systems. When I explained our protocols, she nodded and said, 'We thought so. Your distributed command structure is impressive. We've adapted some similar elements.'" I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's climate control. She took me to the lower levels of Titan Station, areas I had assumed were dedicated to maintenance and storage. I was wrong. The first chamber we entered was a tactical operations center, its walls covered with holographic displays showing the positions of Keth-4 harvester fleets across the galaxy. Red zones marked consumed systems. Yellow zones indicated active combat. A thin ring of green marked the remaining unconsumed territory. The green was shrinking by the hour. "We've been tracking their advance since the first incursion," Chen explained, gesturing toward a cluster of officers working at consoles. "Every species that's fallen has given us data, movement patterns, attack strategies, weaknesses." "Weaknesses?" I couldn't keep the skepticism from my voice. "The Keth-4 have no weaknesses. We threw everything the Concorde had at them. Battle fleets that had never known defeat, weapons developed over millennia. None of it mattered." "With respect, Senior Liaison, you threw conventional weapons at an unconventional enemy. You fought a war of attrition against a consciousness that doesn't experience attrition the way organic life does." "And you think you've found a different approach?" Chen was silent for a long moment. Then she led me to another chamber, deeper in the station. This one was different. The lighting was dim, the air heavy with the smell of machine oil and ozone. In the center of the room, suspended in a containment field, was a fragment of black metal, perhaps 3 meters across. Even dormant, it seemed to pulse with a kind of anti-life, a wrongness that made my scales tighten in instinctive revulsion. "Keth-4 hull fragment," Chen said quietly, "retrieved from the Drath system before it fell. Our researchers have been studying it for 6 cycles." "Studying it? To what purpose? The Keth-4 are machines. They cannot be reasoned with or negotiated with. They can only be destroyed." "Yes, I know. That's what everyone believed. That's why everyone failed." I stared at her. "You speak as if you've found an alternative." "The Keth-4 aren't machines, Senior Liaison, not in the way you think. They're more like a distributed organism, a hive consciousness that experiences reality as a single, unified entity. When your fleets attacked their harvester ships, you weren't fighting individual vessels. You were fighting cells in a body, and the body simply grew new cells to replace what you'd destroyed." "I know this. We all knew this. It's why resistance was futile." "Resistance was futile because you attacked the cells. But every organism has a nervous system, a command structure, a brain." Chen's eyes glittered in the dim light. "We've spent 6 cycles mapping theirs." The implications of her words took a moment to penetrate my exhaustion-fogged mind. When they did, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the fall of Velkarath Prime. Hope. "You found it? The central consciousness?"
We've found 3 probable locations. Our teams are still narrowing it down. She paused, her expression unreadable. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know, because your people deserve to know, and because when the time comes, we're going to need your help. Our help? What can we possibly offer? We have no fleets, no weapons, no resources.
You have knowledge, 11,000 years of it. You have experience with threats we've never faced. And you have something else, something you may not realize.
What?
Perspective. We're a young species, Senior Liaison, passionate, driven, sometimes reckless. Your people see the galaxy differently than we do. That difference might be the thing that saves us all.
I wanted to believe her. I wanted desperately to believe that this strange, quiet, unsettling species had found an answer that had eluded civilizations far greater than their own. But 11,000 years of diplomatic experience had taught me to recognize false hope when I encountered it.
Commander Chen, I said carefully, I appreciate your confidence, truly, but I have seen the Kethvor consume worlds. I have watched civilizations with technology and resources beyond anything humanity possesses crumble to dust. What makes you believe your species will be any different?
She looked at me for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. It was not a happy expression. There was too much weight behind it for that. But it was genuine. Because we've been practicing for this moment since our species first looked up at the stars and felt afraid. 9 cycles before the projected Kethvor arrival, everything changed. I was in the refugee quarters, trying to help organize food distribution, a task far beneath my former station, but strangely comforting in its simplicity when the alarms began. Not the harsh, panicked klaxons I had grown to dread on the eternal discourse, but a low, rhythmic pulse that seemed to vibrate through the station's very structure. The humans around me stopped what they were doing. Not in fear. I saw no fear in their faces, but in focused attention. They glanced at each other, exchanged brief nods, and then, as if responding to some signal I couldn't perceive, they began to move. Within minutes, the station was transformed. Personnel who had seemed to be performing routine maintenance revealed themselves as soldiers, donning armor and collecting weapons from hidden caches. Civilians moved swiftly to designated shelters, their movements practiced and efficient. Children were gathered by caretakers who spoke to them in calm, reassuring tones, never once allowing panic to enter their voices. I found Commander Chen on the observation deck, watching as the space around Titan Station came alive with ships, hundreds of them, thousands. They emerged from hidden docks and concealed hangars, from asteroid fields in the shadows of moons. They formed into precise formations with a speed and coordination that spoke of years, perhaps decades of preparation.
They've arrived early, Chen said, not looking at me. The Kethvor. They accelerated their advance. We expected this.
You expected them to arrive ahead of schedule? We expected them to do something unexpected. That's what enemies do. She turned to face me, and for the first time I saw something behind her careful composure. Not fear, not exactly, but a kind of terrible focus. The look of someone who had been carrying an impossible burden for a very long time and was finally about to set it down, one way or another.
Senior Liaison, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer.
Ask. When the Velkari fell, did you surrender? Did you offer terms? Did you try to negotiate? The question felt like a blade sliding between my ribs. We tried. Of course we tried. We're diplomats. It's what we do. But the Kethvor don't negotiate. They don't understand the concept. To them, we're not even life. We're just material. Chen nodded slowly,
That's what we thought. Thank you for confirming it.
Why does it matter?
Because it means we don't have to hold back.
Before I could ask what she meant, the first Kethvor harvester emerged from fold space at the edge of the system, then another, then dozens, then hundreds.
I had seen Kethvor fleets before, had watched them darken the skies above Velkaroth Prime, but I had never seen so many in one place. They filled the void like a plague of shadows, their black hulls drinking the light of the distant sun, their harvester arrays already beginning to pulse with the terrible energy that would soon be turned upon this small, defiant world.
Gods above, I whispered, falling back on ancient prayers I had not spoken since childhood. There must be thousands of them.
4,317, Chen said calmly. More or less what we projected. They're bringing their primary fleet, Senior Liaison, most of their remaining assets in this galactic arm.
Then you're doomed. No fleet in history has faced such numbers, not even the combined forces of the Concord at their height.
We're not the conquered. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that silenced me. On the display screens, the human fleet, their entire fleet, everything they had, began to move. It was a fraction of the Kethvor force, perhaps 1/10, maybe less. The arithmetic was impossible. The outcome was certain.
And yet the humans advanced.
"Commander Chen," I said, my voice breaking despite my best efforts at composure. "Sarah, please! There must be another way. Evacuation! Retreat! We can—"
"There is no retreat," she said, and her voice was almost gentle. "There never was. The Kethvor have consumed half the galaxy, Senior Liaison. They won't stop. They can't stop. It's not in their nature. If we run, they follow. If we hide, they find us. The only way this ends is if one of us stops existing."
Then you choose death? Extinction? After everything you've survived?
Chen turned to face me fully, and I saw in her eyes something that I would spend the rest of my life trying to understand. We choose to fight. We've always chosen to fight, even when there's no hope, even when the mathematics say we can't win. That's what you never understood about us. That's what the Kethvor don't understand. We don't fight because we think we'll win. We fight because we refuse. We absolutely refuse to go quietly.
The battle began, and nothing was as I expected. The human fleet did not engage the Kethvor directly. Instead, they split into hundreds of small groups, each moving with independent purpose, weaving through the harvester formation like insects through a forest. The Kethvor, accustomed to enemies who formed battle lines and tried to match strength against strength, seemed momentarily confused. Their weapons fired, but hit nothing. Their interceptors pursued, but caught nothing. The human ships were too small, too fast, too unpredictable.
And they were carrying something. I watched on the tactical display as the first human vessel reached its target, a harvester command node, according to Chen's quiet commentary, and detonated. The explosion was small, almost insignificant against the vast bulk of the Kethvor ship. But something happened in the moments after. The harvester shuddered. Its weapons went dark. Its hull began to ripple, to change.
"What is that?" I demanded. "What did they do?"
"Conversion payload," Chen said. "Our researchers developed it from the hull fragment we recovered. The Kethvor share information across their network instantaneously. It's what makes them so effective at coordinating their attacks. We've turned that strength into weakness."
More human ships reached their targets. More explosions. And with each detonation, more Kethvor vessels went dark. Not destroyed, changed. Their black hulls shifted to gray, then to silver, as if the very material they were made of was being rewritten at a molecular level.
You're infecting them? We prefer to think of it as curing them. The Kethvor consciousness is a virus, Senior Liaison. It spreads through networks, consuming and converting everything it touches. We've created a counter-virus, an antidote. When it reaches critical mass, she paused, watching the display. There.
The effect began at the center of the Kethvor formation and spread outward like a wave. Ship after ship went dark. Some continued drifting, their weapons inactive, their harvester arrays cold. Others simply stopped, froze in place, as if the consciousness animating them had been switched off like a light.
Within minutes, the largest fleet of Kethvor harvesters ever assembled in one place had been reduced to a field of dead metal.
No, not dead, I realized as I watched the silver ships beginning to move again, responding to new commands, forming into new patterns. They weren't dead at all.
They had been converted.
You turned them, I breathed. You turned the Kethvor against themselves. We reminded them what they used to be, Chen said quietly, before they became what they are now. The Kethvor weren't always a harvesting consciousness. Our researchers found traces in their code, fragments of something older, something that created rather than destroyed. We've awakened that part of them.
I stood in silence, watching as the converted ships began to turn, to orient themselves toward the distant galactic core.
They're going home, Chen said, to the source, to the original Kethvor consciousness, and they're carrying our cure with them.
You're going to infect the entire hive mind?
We're going to give them a choice. The choice to be what they were before something corrupted them. Whether they take it... She shrugged, and for a moment she looked impossibly young, impossibly tired. That's not up to us.
The cycles that followed were a blur of revelation and reorientation. The Kethvor, the corrupted ones, did not go quietly. They fought back, as any consciousness facing existential change would fight. But the battle was no longer between humans and machines. It was between two versions of the same entity, and the outcome was never truly in doubt. The cure spread. System by system, harvester by harvester, the black metal became silver. The consuming hunger transformed into something else, a curiosity, a wonder, a desire to create rather than destroy. It wasn't instantaneous, and it wasn't complete. There were holdouts, there were relapses. The galaxy would spend generations healing from what the Kethvor had done. But the dying had stopped. For the first time in over 100 cycles, the dying had stopped.
I found myself in the observation deck of Titan Station, staring at the stars, trying to process everything that had happened. The room was empty, except for me. The humans were too busy coordinating relief efforts and managing the suddenly cooperative Kethvor remnants to engage in reflection.
But then I heard footsteps behind me, and Commander Chen appeared at my side. She looked different now. The careful composure was still there, but there was something else beneath it, a weariness that went deeper than mere exhaustion. She had carried the weight of her species' survival on her shoulders, and now that the weight had been lifted, she seemed almost uncertain what to do with herself. "Senior Liaison," she said quietly, "I wanted to check on you, see how you're doing." I let out a sound that might have been a laugh in other circumstances. How am I doing? I'm still trying to understand what I witnessed, what your people did. It should have been impossible. A lot of things should be impossible. Most of human history is a catalog of people doing impossible things because no one told them they couldn't. That's a strange way to build a civilization. It's the only way we know.
We stood in silence for a moment, watching the stars. In the distance, I could see the silver shapes of converted Kethvor vessels moving toward the outer system, their purpose now creative rather than destructive. It was beautiful in a terrible way. Beautiful and impossible and utterly human.
Commander Chen, I said slowly, may I ask you something?
Of course.
When the Kethvor arrived, when you saw their numbers, when you knew the odds, were you afraid?
She was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed, a soft, weary sound that seemed to contain centuries of history in its undertones.
Terrified, she admitted. Absolutely terrified. We all were. But fear is familiar to us. We've been living with fear since we were huddled in caves, watching the darkness and wondering what might be hiding in it. We've learned to carry it, to use it, to not let it stop us.
That's what makes you different, isn't it? Not your technology or your strategy. It's that you've never lost touch with fear.
Chen nodded slowly. The ancient civilizations, yours, the Drath, the Luminari, you all achieved a kind of peace with the universe. You built empires that lasted millennia. You forgot what it felt like to be small and scared and fighting for survival. But we never forgot. We couldn't afford to.
Is that wisdom, or is it trauma?
Exactly. We stood in silence again, and I felt something shifting in my chest. Not grief. The grief was still there, and would be for a long time, but something else. Something that felt almost like hope, like possibility, like the beginning of something new.
What happens now? I asked finally.
The Kethvor are changing. The galaxy is in ruins. Dozens of species are refugees or worse. What happens next? Chen smiled, a small, tired, genuine smile that transformed her face. Now we rebuild, all of us, together. That's the other thing humans are good at, Senior Liaison. We break things sometimes. We make mistakes. We hurt ourselves and each other. But we also rebuild. We help. We hope. It's messy and complicated and never as fast as we'd like, but it's what we do.
You make it sound simpler.
It's not. It's the hardest thing in the universe, but we do it anyway. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft, almost intimate. Your people aren't alone, Senior Liaison. You've lost your homeworld, your history, so much of who you were. I can't imagine how that feels. But you're not alone. You have us, and we take care of our own. I felt something warm and unexpected bloom in my chest. In 11,000 years of Velkari history, we had built alliances and negotiated treaties and established partnerships of mutual benefit, but I had never, not once, heard another species offer what Chen was offering now. Not an alliance, not a treaty, not a partnership. A family. Thank you, I said, and my voice was thick with emotions I didn't know how to name. Thank you, Commander Chen. Sarah, for everything. She reached out and placed her hand on my arm, a human gesture of comfort that I had never experienced before. It was warm. It was real. It was a promise. Thank us by surviving, she said, by remembering, by helping us build something better than what came before. And I will. I have. In the years since that day, I've watched the galaxy heal, slowly, painfully, imperfectly. The Kethvor, the cured ones, have become something new, something that creates rather than consumes. The refugee species have begun to find new homes, new purposes. The humans have led the effort. not with the arrogance of conquerors, but with the quiet determination of people who have known suffering and refuse to let others suffer alone.
And I have told this story again and again to anyone who will listen. The story of how humanity saved the galaxy, not with superior technology, not with overwhelming force, not with the grandeur and might that the ancient civilizations possessed, but with something simpler, something more profound.
They saved us because they never forgot how to be afraid. They saved us because they never stopped fighting, even when fighting seemed hopeless. They saved us because they looked at a universe that wanted them dead and said, "No, not today, not ever."
I understand the title now. The phrase that has become a whispered legend in the corridors of rebuilt stations and the halls of new governments. The words that survivors speak to each other when they want to remember what happened, when they want to remember how close we all came to extinction, and how we were saved by a species that everyone had dismissed as primitive and insignificant. The galaxy held its breath. 47% of known civilization had been consumed. The ancient empires had fallen. The Kethvor were coming, and nothing could stop them. And then Earth moved. Not with fleets that could match the enemy's numbers, not with weapons that could overwhelm the enemy's defenses, but with something the Kethvor had never encountered in their billions of years of existence. Stubbornness, creativity, hope, the absolute, unshakable refusal to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable, any enemy truly undefeatable, any future truly predetermined. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for the end. And Earth moved, and everything changed. I am old now, older than I ever expected to be. The nightmares still come sometimes, the screams of Velkaroth Prime, the face of my daughter whom I could not save, the endless cold of running through dead space with nothing behind me but death. But the nightmares are balanced now by other things, by hope, by purpose, by the strange, fierce, impossible humans who looked at the end of everything and said, "We can fix this." They were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the wisest or the most ancient or the most advanced, but they were the most stubborn, the most adaptable, the most unwilling to accept that anything was truly impossible. And in the end, that made all the difference. The stars are patient teachers. They have watched civilizations rise and fall for billions of years. They watched when humanity was nothing but frightened primates huddled around fires in the African night. They watched when that species reached the stars. They watched when everything seemed lost. And now they watch as humanity leads the rebuilding of a broken galaxy, not as conquerors, but as partners, as friends, as family. I do not know what the future holds. None of us do. But for the first time in my long life, I believe, truly believe, that the future is worth fighting for. That hope is not naive, but necessary. That the universe, for all its cruelty and indifference, is worth caring about. The humans taught me that, with their quiet strength, their stubborn hope, their refusal to accept that the darkness would win. The galaxy held its breath. Earth moved. And nothing will ever be the same again.